Good morning, everyone. It is a happy Thursday morning for the Explicit Measures Podcast. Welcome from Mike, Seth, and Tommy. Good morning, everybody. We've all got swag on today. Today's swag day.
I gotta change it up a little.
Some various form of swag.
I figured for number 30 to do something special here. So
Nice, exactly. I'll drop this into the chat window. So for those of you who want to go get some swag, you can own some Power BI Tips swag as well. So I'll send a link out there to everyone. Swag.powerbi.tips. It's in the chat window. Feel free to jump in. We're trying something new today, so I'm going to be a little bit transparent with our audience. We're streaming this to everything we can think of. It's going to YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitch, and Facebook. And so we'll see if this works well. We'll keep doing it. If not, then we won't. So try new things every day. Anyways,
we're taking that viral adoption to heart. So
yeah, exactly. So today's topic is going to be around data culture. We've been kind of following through. We love the adoption roadmap, and it has been a really good topic of discussion. There's a lot of thoughts around here. We have very many different experiences on how we perceive adoption and growth of Power BI happens. We've all experienced it kind of slightly differently in all of our organizations. And so we're going through another area, which is what we had Matthew Roach talk to our user group probably about 3 months ago or so around data culture. And so this is actually, I think, a really important area, however you define it. This is something that needs to either, you need to identify where you're at and figure out a pattern to grow more in data culture. So I think this is going to be a great topic today. Let's kick things off. I'm going to kick it over to Seth, if you don't mind. Seth.
Yes.
Let's just kick off. So let's just define, per what the Microsoft documentation says, and I'll throw that link in the chat window as well. Per what the documentation says, just kind of give us a brief overview of what, people who don't understand or have never heard the word data culture before. Maybe just give us a brief overview, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, this rolls together, I think, many of the adoption roadmap concepts, which had I been paying attention, I probably would have been like, no, guys, let's make that at the end. But if the singular COE conversation and the many aspects of that was any indication of what happens when we discuss these larger areas, then we may or may not see, some fireworks today. In opinion, just strong opinion. But in general, today data culture kind of encapsulates, and we'll just pull this right off of the roadmap paging, right, where it encapsulates a lot of the particular areas that the roadmap covers related to COE, executive support, governance, right, the adoption of a lot of these elements for successful implementations of Power BI, as well as focusing, I think, on some of the essential aspects, right? The specific things that we can talk about in detail, probably related to data discovery, data democratization, and like the literacy of your organization as it comes to data. So that's kind of setting the framework for today. The thing I love, in the article is, quoting specifically, the term data culture can be defined in different ways by different organizations, which basically it reminds me very distinctly of people who come up with questions, that say, how do I? And the answer is, it depends.
Yes,
right.
That is the very consultant answer.
Right.
It depends on what, and there's a lot of things to consider here. There's a lot of things that go into a data culture. There's a lot,
Right.
where you're at, what your audience is like, who's producing this, and there's actually different patterns that we see kind of emerging here. There's like a bottom up approach, like the business is kind of leading things. It's kind of a homegrown approach, and then there's a top down approach. IT and corporate says we're going to mandate this. This is what we're doing. And then there's a hybrid approach, a little bit of both in some cases. So I think depending on where this thing originates, potentially can influence or you can perceive your data culture in your company in different ways. And I've been in a couple of different organizations where I've seen some really good things and I've seen some really like sketch things. So we can talk about some of those too.
So I guess to frame into the questioning, right, rather than talking about specific areas, which I think we'll get to.
Yeah,
Right?
We all want to, yeah.
Yeah.
One of the key areas of the article, which I agree with, is data culture is what we do, not what we say, right? So
Correct.
a lot of the adoption framework, I think, where you
Mm.
and I have kind of disagreed or gotten into it, is for what needs to be in place, and what are the things to support different areas, and we might get there, but this is like the practical, like data culture to me, and how I'm absorbing it, is like what is going on in your organization, and like a key point Melissa makes in here is what are the things that we allow and support in the organization around data and important information. And I think that really matriculates, or is the essence of kind of the context today of what we're talking about.
Yeah, definitely.
So, Tommy, you can go ahead, but I'm
Yeah,
going to follow with one question, which would be, I'd love to go into, before we get into the nuts and bolts, like overall, what are some examples of an organization to you guys that have a
sure.
healthy data culture versus a bad one? But
And I think that's a perfect question to ask too. And I love this one too, because what you said about like it's depends, and I think also says it's an abstract concept, right? Because I think out of all of the parts of the adoption roadmap, this is the one that really has no control. You can't mandate a data culture
Mm.
anywhere. You can put things in place to affect it, but at the end of the day, that you can't say we're doing a data culture. You can only hope people's personalities and behaviors and habits change, and that's kind of the fun part of this. I would say from a data culture, or at least kind of identifying, how do you know if you actually have one? Because you might have a really bad one, but to actually see, like, do we actually have a thriving data culture at our company? I think it's not just users using Power BI, or they're using it more. I think it's also the data culture of the people building reports and the people understanding what the data does. So, for example, rather than, hey, I'm on BI, I get requests in, we get a lot of requests, that's great, and we build a lot of reports and people use them. Great. That doesn't mean it's a good data culture. Maybe you're on the way, but to me, that data culture is that understanding of the impact of the data. So rather than, hey, I get a request for a report, then we say, what's the impact of the business? And the person who requested it can easily go, here's what we need, here's our target numbers, because we have something to target, we have some context around this,
Mhm.
and this is how we're going to use it. This is the actions. They already know those questions. That this report's not just meant for me to see, oh, sales are $5,000, great. It's actually something that they can do with it, and they know that that's what a report's supposed to do. And that those reports, like, to me, I tell my boss, I'm like, I know I'm going to be successful here when I'm walking through the halls of the company and I see a meeting going on and a report's up to me, or someone goes, hey, Tommy, can you come in here real quick and explain this? Like, to me, that is when I know that, in a sense, like, the culture is great, because we're relying on data to make decisions. And again, you
Yeah.
can, in a sense, define that any way you want, but I think it kind of goes into every part of a process, both for the BI author who's building a report around context, and the users.
So I like what you're going with that, Tommy. I think you have a much more mature view of that. I think there's actually like stages to this as well in
Yeah, oh
data
yeah.
culture. So like, I guess I would like to describe some of the earlier stages that I've seen as well. So like, I think if people look at that and I think hearing your description, people would be kind of overwhelmed based on the volume. Like, I think it might be too much for what their data culture is today. Let me just give you some framework here where I'm thinking, right? So I think your description of it is where I'm walking the halls and I'm seeing Power BI reports showing up. Awesome. I think another thing about data culture is like, hey, we've built some dashboards that are on a screen and it just rotates. There's
Hmm.
data that we're putting data in front of people and it's causing them to think about it, and they're asking for, like, you're successful when people are asking you for you to build reports a certain way. They're coming
Hmm.
to you and saying, hey, I need this data shaped like this, or can we make a report that helps
They're
me
asking
make
the right
this
questions.
decision? Yes, correct. That asking the right questions thing isn't as easy as I think you say
No,
it is, and it's,
I never said it was
well,
easy.
not easy, but there's a lot more nuance to this, because I think there's some areas, and I've seen it in different business units in a certain company, where there was one unit that everyone was in Excel and everyone had to write formulas. That was like all they could do, and the analysis that they did was slow, took a long time, And I would say the data culture was trying to grow there. They used a lot of data, but they weren't very mature in like automating things and putting things in a place where they could just easily look at stuff and this whole concept of like do it once and do it right and then reuse it over and over again. That was kind of foreign to them. So I think in that respect, I think to myself like there's a spectrum to this, and I feel like a lot of companies that I've interacted with are on that maybe earlier end of the spectrum
Yeah.
where they're still trying to figure out like I can't put like a complex chart in front of someone because we don't even understand the basics yet. Like
Mhm.
if I like there was this really speaks to the class I went to in Delta Associates where we had learned like you have to go through, and this is category management's a challenge, right? It's hard to figure out what's going on. And then when you look at your sales and then compare your sales to other people in the industry when you have like industry standards, there's a lot of information you can get at. And you don't know where you're winning, where you're losing. And at the end of the day, it's like, where do we spend our money to make the most sales for our company? That's what we're trying to do. That's
Right.
a lot of what this is. And so I find a lot of times people just get paralysis by analysis and couldn't get through the numbers. And again, I got to point on Delta training again from, Delta Associates. It was amazing to me because it gave me this ability to figure out what is the most important data point. And so when I talk data culture, it to me it's not only about making reports actionable, it's also about making sure that the audience that consumes those reports can understand analytical things and can see charts and trends and identify here is the most impactful part of this chart or the data set we're trying to convey. And so a lot of times when I build reports, I follow a process where we say, let's talk about the insights.
Mhm.
What is insightful? What things do you need to know about this information? Let's talk about that first. Because the report building portion of this is all secondary. We need to focus on what's important now, like what do we need to make the decisions on? And then from there, either go find data to support or not support those decision making processes. So I think data cultures is in my mind, it's a lot of being able to talk about data, being able to read charts, being able to make, have teams and rely and make decisions on data.
I'll chime in now.
Sorry,
I
we've all
guess
talked a lot already.
Yeah.
no. That's not what I'm referring to. I'm just trying to encapsulate some of the thoughts that you guys are throwing down. I think if I'm going to say like what is the difference between a good data culture and a bad one, I'm going to kind of lean on the same things that we've talked about in different areas, which is you're going to see or have different outputs or outcomes in a good data culture, right? If you have a good data culture, you're going to have things like definitions, areas of information, less questions, more clarity,
Yep.
like people all on the same page around how do they access information?
Yeah.
Like, what is the information being provided to them? At what level is it? How do they go learn and do something? What
Yep.
are the support mechanisms? Like, all of those things. A bad example is the thing that came to my mind originally when I was thinking about this is being in a meeting where decisions are made and the outcome of that meeting is only the people in the meeting know what the outcome is, and there's no documentation in OneNote. There's no record and share of the meeting with pertinent information. There's no addition to a process flow.
Mhm.
There's nothing comes out of that except additional tribal knowledge. When you have siloed people in an organization, let
That's a good
alone the
point.
organizational units
Yep.
that just know their thing, that's indicative of a bad data culture, right? Like, and you're the support of that, and I think where it'll be an interesting segue is how does this go from just a organizational unit where you have bad practices of not having a good data culture, but like what strikes me is the um the does the organization support that behavior, or does it support behavior that slaps you on the wrist for doing that kind of stuff where decisions are made and not put somewhere?
You actually that actually brings up a point about the siloed part that I think is another part that is so hard in terms of you can't mandate it, um, and you can't govern it, but it's part of that behavior where when we talk about context and impactful data, usually that's going to talk about some sort of performance, right? So something's arrow up, arrow down.
Mhm.
So and at the end of the day, whether it's marketing, product, obviously sales, but what I've seen is, and what's so hard is usually that performance is indicative of the person's activity. So if I'm on the if I'm on advertising and we're building an impactful report, well, that's going to show whether or not the ads are doing well or not,
Yep.
which then is again a review on that person.
Mhm.
So a data culture usually has to go over um, that hurdle of people understanding that this is not necessarily we're judging you, we're helping you make better decisions, because people get protective. People get, I don't want to, give you a target number because in a sense, what if we don't reach it? Or I don't want to show you, or give you that baseline that shows you if we're doing well or not. And I've seen this in multiple departments, that is the hardest thing, because it is part of a behavior thing, because now they're
Mhm.
getting judged. And again, it's not really like, hey, person X, your campaigns are down, therefore,
You're an awful person
you're
because of it.
right, but that's the thought,
Yeah,
and that's
yeah,
the
yeah.
thought, because I think that's CYA.
It's
uh
also, so I also say this too, and I read this from I think this was from Simon Sinek, who was, I think I said his name right
mhm,
correctly. He talks about a
yeah,
lot of like the infinite game, and that's one of his books that I think it's a really good perspective on things. Like, anyways, that's a whole other conversation. But one thing that Simon says is when employees are in a company and they're constantly focusing on CYA,
mhm,
they are not focusing on the production of the company. So to me, when I see when I hear things like, I'm collecting these datas, I'm collecting these things to cover myself so that way I don't get fired, you're in a place where you're worried about the job, and you're actually taking away efficiency from the company because the company is not providing safety. And we should be able to make goals, and we
yeah,
should be able to not meet them, right? That should be something that we should do. And we should also, something that I'm really burnt about, a lot of it that comes out of the corporate world a little bit, is we've got to make 25% more sales this year.
yeah,
And then we make like 15% more. And then they're like, well, this was horrible. This was the awfulest year. And I get that there's shareholders, there's people that is expecting different deliverables on things. But at the end of the day, I'm thinking like, we're playing a game that's infinite. There's no rules to business. I mean, there is in some respects. You want to be like moral and do things the right way, but like there's um uh, there's no like boundary, there's no like a set rule game here. Like, you can do however you want, and so sometimes you'll be ahead of the other players in the game, and sometimes you'll be behind. And but the goal ultimately is to like continue playing the game. And so like a whole bunch of really cool concepts that came along with
yeah,
that book, and some interesting things there as well. I want to
and
bring up a point here from
yeah.
Kevin. Kevin off of YouTube says, is there a way to measure data culture? And that was one of the points here I want to kind of highlight here. I don't think you can measure it with like a meter stick. There's not like numbers you can put behind it, but I think you can start gauging this, and this is what the article actually talks about. It's a little bit more of a, it's what you're doing, but one thing you could see is a healthy data culture motivates employees at all levels of your organization to generate and distribute actionable knowledge. I think that's a good way of wrapping up that statement. We're talking about actionable knowledge. I like that statement.
So the way I think we're all framing it too, I can just imagine, uh, like, my dad and son, he's like, it's a mindset, man. It's a way of life, because everything we're saying is it really starts with,
You're a
again,
stoner when
how,
you say that?
yeah,
It's all
I
it's all in
data
your
culture,
mind.
man. Yes, it starts with the mind, man.
Do you whisper
So
like that at work too? I don't know.
when I talk data culture, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
how's your bar chart, man?
How's your bar chart?
Dude, you're doing great. Yeah, that would be great if I
Oh
could learn
man.
to. The ROI is insane.
This is devolving.
um, but and again, I think I said this last time, where words have meaning, and when I think the word culture, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's, I don't think you can measure it. I think, yeah, I think there's maybe some yardsticks. You would see certain activity and people behave, but I don't think there's a way. There's no way to measure it, because it's not more reports are being created.
Mhm.
You can't measure the quality of a report, so to speak.
Yeah.
But it's again, people understanding. what a report does, the mindset of what data is doing for them.
Hmm.
And it also, we don't talk about the actual people building the reports, but do they also have the context to build a report the right way?
Yeah. Yep.
So, and it's that whole, it's the people's, and again, to go back to, is their people's perception and their, like, what they, again, the mindset of what data is doing and what it can do for them.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a little bit more ambiguous because you have so many you could have so many parts of the organization. However, like some things that come to mind are the things I said, right? Like
Yeah, yeah,
what are the outcome things that I would expect to see if there's a good data culture? Are you always going to ask somebody the question, or are they pointing you to the same location where you can get that information all
yeah.
the time,
Yep.
right? Are
That's a
you
healthy sign. Yeah.
that's a healthy sign,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
When you're reading a report, is that report providing you, the place where you can go look up the definition, or
Mhm.
is it providing that definition for you so you don't have to be like, sales of what? Right?
Right.
Is it
Yep.
like is it Mark sales? Is it Billy sales? Like
Yeah.
um, and I think those if you start to say in my day, the percentage of time I'm going to a reference point as opposed to a person
Mm-hmm.
is indicative of where you're potentially at with your organizational level
I
with
like that.
or technically your unit where you work as well as the larger org.
Sure.
Yeah.
I like that actually a lot. So again, I'm looking at the data culture diagram. It's like kind of a very
Mhm.
large bubbly diagram here on the Microsoft website, and it's really interesting because we've touched on a lot of key points, and there's actually a really good amount of definition here. So there is this concept of data culture, and data culture encompasses like executive support, which we haven't quite talked about. We've talked briefly around like you know the idea of center of excellence. This is that idea of there's a centralized knowledge location, there's people participating in that central knowledge generation and location, and there's with the center of excellence there's a whole bunch of organizational principles that
Mhm.
go along with this, like mentoring and enablement. How do you do user support? User support can come from a centralized team of the center of excellence, but that can also come from your peer, someone else who knows how to do it in your department, right? There's a community of practice. Do we meet regularly to kind of figure things out and ask questions and kind of continue to grow it? What does governance look like? We haven't talked about that one quite yet, but that's in my mind, governance is really important here because this is the difference between like, do we use just a promoted data set or do we get to a certified data set? Like I think there's some things there that are valuable to the organization. What I was talking about earlier was data literacy, right? Can our people understand the information that's there? I think Seth, you were just talking about the data discovery portion and
Yeah.
data democratization, right? If I have a question, do I know that there's a sales data set? I may not even know that. Like, how do we push people so that way people aren't building their own data sets over and over again? We want to start communicating broadly to the organization. Hey, there's this thing, and we can't be doing these things in vacuums. And I think that actually goes very well with a comment from Sergio off of LinkedIn. He goes, "What are your thoughts on education in a solo data point?" And I think the data democratization, communicating to a larger audience that there is data here in this silo that might be relevant to you, and then providing regulated access to it, because we're not going to give everyone, the financials data to everyone, but there may be like sales numbers or sales number by customer. So your company has to kind of decide that, and then there has to be a process. And I think a lot of what we're talking about here is putting proper process in place to be able to let the company, you know, communicate that there's more data to everyone.
Mhm.
I do want to make a point in here,
Yeah.
and then I'll give it over to you, Tommy. I think a lot of my thoughts around the roadmap still and have centralized around the organizational adoption piece, because for me,
Mm.
looking at building this out in a much more hardcore way in relatively short terms,
Mhm.
I'm very interested in making sure that those support structures are there so that the organization can have successful rollout of that piece within the data culture. To
Mhm.
your point and that question, though, right? What hangs off that are those kind of deliverables of data literacy, data democratization, data discovery. So
Yeah.
I think as we've already gotten a lot of questions I'm the single man show. How do I get Power BI adopted in my company? I think this is the point in the conversation where we can say, if you want to influence Power BI adoption, these are the things you can start to do today,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Which is like, start with your own
Mhm.
definitions, your
Yes.
library of information, your areas where you can point people to reference what's going on or what you're building.
Yep.
Like, if you're the person that is always has to answer the question, you're not supporting the structure. You're not supporting the growth of Power BI in the organization.
Yep.
If you're building out those things that other people can use, that's where I think that's something you can hand off
Yeah.
as you start pushing into kind of what could be some of these longer polls of like getting an executive support or
Yep.
trying to build this up within the organization. Like, those are just like, hey, I've already done this. We can plug this right into these areas. And that's hugely successful. Those are time consuming activities
Yeah.
to take all of that knowledge and put it in a place where it's useful, and then you can start to work into your own implementations the same things that Matthew Roach talked about with us, right? How do you upgrade a data set? How do you create, more trust in certain levels of reporting, and
Mhm.
that's where I think a lot of that starts to plug in. So you can start those things right now while you take on those longer
Yeah.
polls, right? And moving up.
So Melissa Coates has officially joined us on YouTube. I see her comments coming through the chat. So uh, don't say anything. Don't say anything crazy now, because
Yeah.
she's
Well, she
She
watching.
already
made
said that
herself known.
she already
This is why she doesn't talk to you, Mike.
I know.
She lurks.
This is good. And
she's waiting.
I love this stuff. This stuff is really good, and I think a lot of this stuff. What I like to talk about here too is there's like some really good sections here. They're talking about like data culture, vision, and where we want
Mhm.
to go. And I think this is a lot of this. I think is it is a journey for companies. I do see that there's a lot of things you have to do, and I think Seth, you made a really good point there. That it's so cool when you start thinking about I can't be the centralized person for all of this, and I think it's the only way you can really drive larger adoption and growth within a company. And I'll kind of throw my little caveat on here, not caveat, another thought. I think really where people start adopting stuff is when they are able to remove pain from their current process. I've said this before, I'll say it again. I'm a big proponent of make people's lives easier or help them do something faster than they could before. And when you do that, when you provide that level of assistance, I think they're more apt to jump in and develop and just participate. Like they're just sure. Hey, I used to take this weird process of exporting data to Excel and then copy pasting it, and then it was wrong, and then I'd have errors in my Excel sheets. Like, if you can just say, hit a button, refresh, walk away, come back, get a coffee, data's ready to go, that's a huge win for you. And I think this is where I think why I see Power BI adopting so much faster than other tools is because it's giving these really strong tools, and they're in a simple package, PowerBI.com, and the free desktop, which is again unheard of. They're giving away such a powerful tool for stinking free. I just love that. But now this is in the hands of just every business user, and so that's really I think driving this crazy adoption and why this is growing so fast. It's easier. Yeah, Tom says it well on YouTube. It's easier than ever before. It's so easy to get people going when you start removing pain points.
So I got 2 points from that, and I want to comment about the pain points, which I agree with, because I mean you can almost call every Power BI pro, I think, or anyone who works in the platform just really a solution provider at this point, because that's what trying to solve different problems. And uh, but I want to say something, because it's not just anything that you're saving time with, right? Because how many requests have you gotten where someone's like, hey, can you build this in a report? It takes me 10 minutes to do, but I don't like downloading the file. And it's just for that person.
Mhm.
So to me, that even though you're in a sense that's a pain point for that person, it's also that the right things are funneling and it being identified as what can be valuable to the business to save time on, not just a random shortcut for someone because they don't want to put the work in. It's actually identifying those things like, hey, let's actually review what can we do to make everyone's lives easier. What can we review that are the biggest pain points,
You're
rather than just a random person
you're
coming to
you're,
you and
you're
asking
triggering
for
me right now
something.
telling me with that comment because I can't I can't. No, not in a bad way. It's a good
Oh,
comment,
okay.
Yeah.
but I can't.
Shoot.
I cannot
I was like,
stand.
man.
I cannot stand when people tell me I have no time. Like I've heard that excuse multiple
Yeah.
times. Like you give them some stuff in here.
Man.
I'm gonna help you with some Power BI things. I'm gonna and the whole thing is here. I'm a big proponent of trying to teach people, and it burns me no other when they're like, I don't have time to I don't have time to learn this. What do you mean you don't have time to save hours of your work week to do something more
Right.
efficient? Like
Mhm.
I don't even want to talk to you. Like I'm literally like flustered and frustrated and like I can't handle it. I just can't. Don't come to me and ask for me to. I will not help you if you can't even help yourself.
Mhm.
And don't give me that excuse ever. I can't stand it. It burns me, man.
Yeah. But honestly, that goes to the culture, right? So
It does. It really
in a
does.
bad culture, and I have one thing to say on culture that I'm trying to forget, but I'm gonna have to say it.
Say it,
Because
Tommy.
anyway, the first with the culture. So if someone just randomly comes to you and puts a ticket in for, hey, can you make this Excel file or report? And it's just for that person, and you have to do it. That's not a good culture. But a good culture, again, is a whole. It's in a sense, when I say organization, I don't mean the company. I mean, in a sense, the hierarchy of the company where that request would never get funneled to you to do because they know it's not valuable.
Yep.
So that's culture. So I need to say this, and this may be out in left field or just way off, but the word culture to me, and I can't help everything we're talking about, how well this relates. Because the word culture was a very prominent word in my family growing up. And hear
Uh
I
oh.
can hear my father saying, people, there's no culture here. Anyways, when we moved to Florida. So every day. Anyway, so I just want to put this in perspective of, and maybe Melissa can completely tell me I'm wrong, but I can't help but think of this if you think of like neighborhoods, like old New York neighborhoods or old Chicago neighborhoods they say, oh, this neighborhood was the Italian culture. Like
Mhm.
there's a big Italian culture.
Sure.
To me, and then they say, oh, it went away, kind of thing. Like everyone moved out. Now they're doing something in Chicago now where they're doing all the events again. There's a guy who came in who's doing like annual like big events in downtown Chicago called like Festa Italia. And so people are saying, oh, the Italian culture is coming back.
Yeah.
And I go, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's talk mindset, behavior, and organization again.
Okay.
Like a hierarchy.
I'm gonna
So
write these
what you're
down so
seeing
I
that-
don't forget
yeah.
that I don't forget to talk. So
So
what are your 3 talking points? I want to make sure I catch them.
I already forgot, man. So,
Oh crap! I should have written it down faster.
mindset, behavior,
Okay.
and a third one that I'll figure out as
Okay.
I go. But so like when it comes to, again, take this Italian culture thing. So
Yep.
or at least in Chicago, people are speaking the language.
Mhm.
So there's actually people who are talking about like, who are proud to be Italian kind of thing.
Okay.
There's a network, there's a community. They know where to go. I know where the events are. There's there's actually a Chicago Italian American magazine. So there's a community, right? Whether or not I'm actively involved, there's some sort of communal feeling for the individual person. So that's the macro. The micro is the individual person being part of the culture is being proud, being aware, and making decisions like on like the mindset of either I'm Italian or I'm Polish, like Chicago's big Polish culture
Interesting.
too.
I'm
And
drawing
then
a lot. This
yeah.
is cool because
Yeah,
I'm
it's
drawing a
good,
lot of
man.
analogies between
And
like you
that-
say culture, and I'm drawing a lot of analogies to the same thing you have here in the data space. Like you say mindset, behavior, and there's another thing that I couldn't remember what you said,
Yeah.
but like speaking the language. Right? Is our company speaking the data language? Are we having conversations and not going on? I feel this data is da da da
Right.
da. It's not feeling based. It's this report shows me, or I've done an analysis and it starts with this, and here's how I got to this answer. I'm telling a data story. That's
Yeah.
cool. And then you also made a note around like
Sharing stories, yeah.
we have a network, right? There's a network of things happening here. I have a network of other people that I'm regularly meeting with. And it may be within business hours and it may be without business hours, right? So I know that Rockwell Automation does a Power Hour Friday. They just, because they want to drive the culture, they need to engage more people. They just have a standing meeting. People show up for a couple hours, ask questions. People can just show up and learn and or get their help that they need. I think that's awesome. It's like it's a place to go. It's some place where you guys can show up and ask the questions and feel included. And I know now you find other passionate people around your data things. I think that's really cool. And then, regularly meet is another thing you said. That also
Yeah.
I think is very important. Like having regular meetings either online or I built this new report. We're going to walk through it. I think that's huge to actually do like a walkthrough video of the report you've produced and just, again, record the video, talk through how you built it, what you click on, how to click on things, and then drop the video into your center of excellence. These are great points.
Is the collective group active in promoting it and, continuing to be up to date? So
if you're doing your job right, I will participate and I will also share it with someone else who I think will find value from it. If I'm finding value,
right.
There's nothing I can do but to help share it with somebody else.
Yeah.
That's cool. I like those are real. It's a really good analogy. I didn't mean to cut you off there in the whole idea, but I think that's a lot of good.
That's good.
There's so many good points in there. I wanted to kind of like take them from the Italian culture that you've seen and push them into like data culture.
So I don't, maybe this relates to like in a sense, but probably the biggest thing about culture, or at least Italian culture, when there's a good one, is identity. I don't know how well that relates though. Like I can identify being Italian and I very well, but I don't know if that relates with this.
Yeah.
Sure.
But that is part of culture.
Absolutely. Because if you're gonna, as an organization, say we have an awesome data culture. That is, what we represent as far as one of the most important things in our organization. That's an identity.
Yeah.
Absolutely, it is.
Yeah.
Right. I think I love everything you said, Tommy.
That's great because I wasn't sure about that.
A lot of there's so many correlations there that make a ton of sense. Right?
Totally.
And you let off with everybody knows where all the events are, right?
Yeah. Starting there.
So it's definitions. It's, everybody knows where to go. Everybody's in the know because those things are being put in places that everybody can access.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Whether it's data, whether it's information, etc. I think I'm gonna back up a little bit before your awesome segue, because unlike most topics where I'm like, Mike, that's too granular, like we're on a higher level, I think this one falls directly into the very focused areas that we as individuals can impact.
Yeah.
And that is the granular. Like when you start thinking about your job in a not just solving the problem, but thinking about the larger problem, and if you're solving that with what you're doing, with definitions of information, with putting that somewhere, you're saving your own time. You're maximizing your output in the future, because when people have questions, they're either going to come to you because you're the only one that knows it, or you've put it somewhere.
Right.
And then when you start telling people about all of the stuff that you're putting somewhere,
yes, it's huge.
They tell people and they tell people and
then it grows.
More people stop asking you questions.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, at least it's the same question.
It's self-serving to some degree to start this on your own.
Yeah,
totally. And I'll put out a really good analogy here. And this, I think, is a very telling thing from my careers, is where I've gone through my life career here. For a period of time, I managed a call center, and a call center is one of these very key, like if you think about center of excellence, like a commenter from someone on YouTube said, like last week when we were talking about this data culture thing, they're like, you know what? A center of excellence really is more than just Power BI center of excellence. And Tommy kind of, Tommy was making this point, or Seth was maybe making this point, and Tommy kind of ripped him a new one and was like, we're talking about, this is the Explicit Measures Podcast. We're talking about center of excellence here, but it really does.
Fruit.
It does. It was low hanging fruit. But this really does apply. This really applies. Like the center of excellence is actually a thing that can be used in many areas. It's not something that's central to just Power BI. A center of excellence could be used for anything that you want to start centralizing people around and driving adoption towards, because again, the call center thing was huge for me because I was doing two people's job. Two people were hired to run the call center, and they were just constantly answering questions, but they weren't taking the questions, putting them into a common repository, and then pointing people to the repo to look at the questions and answers. So what I started doing is I took probably like the first 6 months or so and answered all the questions, but I didn't give them the answers. They would email me, I would answer the question and put it in a centralized location and say, here's where you find all these answers, go here. And so I took a job that took two people to run all the questions and figure out the problems and deal with the issues, it was about half to a third of my job. That was what I was doing a third of it. And I could spend other time doing analytical things. So it really worked. I mean, and that's like the quintessential, like I'm servicing tens of thousands of questions to people, lots of phone calls, but all the people who are answering the calls know where to go to look for information. I'm doing training. There was like regular talks between me as a knowledge provider and the call center as the knowledge givers, right? And that's what we're doing. We're building like a centralized location. And again, I'll say it again, don't ever answer someone's question or email directly. Instead, write up their answer or record the answer, put it in a common area, and send them a link to where that answer is, because you will get the same question many, many times.
Yeah.
And then all you have to do is say, here's the link, go here. And that's much faster than you having to rewrite the answer all over again. It provides consistency and it makes your life a whole. And at some point, they start getting the message that if I need to go look for something, I go to this page and I start
Go
searching
look it
for
up
it.
first.
I think
Yeah.
Right, because you are
you're hitting the
enabling
nail on
people.
the head.
Yes.
You are enabling people to make you the easy button.
Exactly.
And that is not
Yeah.
what you want.
We are the path of maximum resistance, as
Yes.
Matthew Roach would say.
Yes.
Yeah, I am the path. I am the path.
I am the path of maximum resistance.
Yeah.
Go to my center of excellence. That is the easier path of
Yeah.
resistance.
But the interesting segue about that is
Yeah.
is not that person not caring or being mean.
True.
No.
They're maximizing their time.
Correct.
And just saying, hey, rather than answer this one question that's going to take 15 minutes to answer, and that's how I've used my time, I'm going to go put this out on a community site, or I'm going to go put this in a centralized location. Then I'm going to point you there. And then anybody else who asks that question, all I have to do is send a link.
Yep.
And the thing is, and I think you guys are hitting the nail on the head when it comes to, I think if you know culture is good, is because you could create that repository of videos or questions and answers, but if someone does not see the value in it, they will not go to it, and they will continue to do their continued micro behavior, not necessarily getting in line
Right.
with the bigger picture. And
Yep.
the same thing when we're talking about data and the reporting and the way to do it. Like, here's how to request a report. Here's how to look at a report. If they don't see the value to identify with that, they're not going to be aligned in that behavior. So I think
You can push them there.
you can push them. And again, that goes back to stakeholders, where there sometimes is the carrot and the stick.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying if you are an active enabler of bad
Yes.
behavior if you're answering their question all the time.
I
I'm
know.
not saying don't
Yeah, yeah,
provide
yeah.
information.
Yeah.
I'm saying you change how you provide information.
Yes, but
Correct.
and that's what I'm saying. You can do so instead of answering the questions, you can build a repository. But what I'm saying, just because you build a repository of questions and answers,
Yep.
if that person does not see the value in it, they will find other means.
Oh, totally
If it's
agree.
not valuable.
Correct.
I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying. Like, you can always refer people there to try to change their behavior.
Correct. And I think another, so someone asks online here, it says like,
Yeah.
what are some good places where you can start building this repo, kind of code-based repo of this stuff? And I've personally built SharePoint pages. I found that they were very helpful. They added a lot of flexibility of things I needed to add. SharePoint pages come with the ability of adding a Teams channel. So if you're a Microsoft-centric shop, I'd highly recommend start putting, again, you can just start doing it. Like, this is something you can start, this is something I would say is, this is accessible to everyone. As long as you can create a SharePoint page, work with your IT team to get one started. But this is very achievable for any individual within your organization. And you can start it in a business unit. You can start it for a team of 3 people. And what you'll find, I think, is if you do that and you start adding value and you're making people's lives easier and you're not the path of least resistance, but your knowledge base, your center of excellence is, I think you'll by nature just find the adoption. And then, kind of like what Tommy was doing, right? Tommy was kind of in a company and he was kind of the data leader. And by providing value, by making their reporting easier to consume, they promoted you, pushed you further, gave you more responsibility. And I think if you're one of those individuals who's willing to teach and drive some of that data culture, you're going to find opportunity.
So we're actually migrating to not that the platform matters as much, but we're actually migrating Confluence because it just seems to be a little easier from a user point of view.
You're migrating to Confluence from SharePoint.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So we're
I've liked
seeing
Confluence too a lot.
We're seeing a lot more usage with people to use Confluence.
Yeah.
Just because they can see what's available. So because
and
we
discoverability.
Okay.
Discoverability.
And that matters too. Like, if you saw a SharePoint site, you don't know what's in it.
Well,
you're not going to click around.
Well, I'll also say this too: a SharePoint site is only as good as the design of the SharePoint site. So there is Confluence. I would say Confluence is a much more fluid program to present discoverability on it. A SharePoint site can also do the same thing, but it actually requires a lot more thought, I think, initially in the design of the SharePoint site. So I'm a bit more of a techie person. I like building websites and things like that. So I'm able to think about that user story. Not every data person is always thinking about UX design and user stories. So that way SharePoint might be a bit more work to get going, but I've used Confluence. I really like it. I have a number of clients that use it, and I think it's very helpful. So I would also echo like the top two that I've played with and then I like Confluence and SharePoint are probably my top two choices if I had it, depending on what your
I,
your
I
company
would I would
accepts.
say, but at the same time, I think the important point, Mike, is give it some thought first. How
Hmm.
how do you want
Yes.
Yeah.
to structure the information? Because
Yep.
you i- if you have an Excel file and it's in SharePoint and it's shareable and many people can go look at that online file, that's a win.
Yep.
That's a great starting point.
Yep.
But to like build it in such a way that if you're gonna upgrade to a
Hmm.
full SharePoint site or Confluence
Yep.
or some other platform,
Yes.
it's easily portable, right? Like,
Agreed.
oh, I've built this thing, it's in this structure, this tab goes here, this tab goes here, this tab. So
Yes.
just it's the structure of how you define all of those key insights so they're discoverable for people.
Yes.
And if is it just a raw Excel file, that works, right?
It's a starting
It's
point.
somewhere except your head,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I agree with that 100%. Any other, so we've been talking a lot about like data culture. There's some really interesting points here in data culture vision that I think that are relevant to pull out here. Um, I think again this the article is just rich. There's just every like you have to
Yeah.
read it slowly and
And yeah.
multiple times because there seems to be like there's so many good bullet points in here. I love the vision. A healthy vision of a data culture should originate at the executive level. It should align with your organizational objectives, right? We're not going to go building reports that don't mean anything. And we say it all the time. You're building reports that are either saving you money or making your money. If your report doesn't fall in one of those buckets, I'd question if you even need to do it. I don't think you need to be working on it actually. Directly influence your adoption strategy. So your culture is going to directly influence like how your strategy will roll out. Is it a SharePoint site? Is it a Confluence page? Is it something? Is it weekly meetings? Is it monthly meetings? Do we do a video for every report we produce? Like these are the kind of decisions I think you want to be talking about to help people engage and build this. Any thoughts around data culture vision
Yeah.
bullet points?
So when it comes to the vision, I completely agree. It's having that right idea from the get go. One thing we haven't talked on too much today is that the literacy and the discovery. Like we've touched on it, but I don't. Maybe we're. I want to put weight. I want to put more weight on how important those are,
Mm-hmm.
because you can't just say you do the data and you whatever someone provides you. We've had this conversation before about the
Yep.
terminology at a company.
Yep.
And if you have different departments who have, they consider a lead a different thing,
Yep.
that you have to change that before I think the culture is going to move forward. So because then you can't from building data or building insights, you're limited. Like you already have a ceiling.
Yeah.
If
Yep.
people can't agree on the terminology, so you literally are now not just on the business intelligence team, you're almost on, you're really going to change everyone's way of speaking,
So
like throughout the entire company.
So for this, you hit on a point that I think is verbatim spelled out in the article really well. Under the data culture section, it talks about this is a great quote. I'm going to probably have to
Mhm.
use this at some point. Leaders at all levels need to actively demonstrate what's important through their actions. Again, it's one of these things we can't be playing
Mhm.
lip service to this. We need to put time behind it. And I think this is another great point, Tommy, to your point there, right? If we're gonna drive this data culture, if we're gonna get better than where we're at right now, we need to really seriously think through of like how much time of my employees, and this is leaders at every level, right? So one of the things we talk about in Center of Excellence is we need to talk to the managers of people who are going to be involved in it because we're going to
Yeah.
expect that those people to participate for 1, 2, 3 hours a week. There's a Friday session that we're going to do. This becomes part of their goals inside their employee goals, and that becomes an actionable item that we can measure. Hey, we're going to stand up the Center of Excellence. We want, hey, you're a leader in your area. You're an analytical leader. Let's go talk to their manager and see if we can get buy-in and say, hey, we want this person to help out. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to make data access easier for your team, as well as we're going to use some of your team to help further the goals of the
Right.
company. And so you need that higher level buy-in to let those people participate.
And it's, I don't want to say top down, but you need those people to say, hey, this is how we're going to define it now.
Yeah.
I've seen this before where you had a certain metric, 10 departments, 10 different calculations,
Yep.
because each one needed to see a different way, but they all called it the same
Same
thing.
thing.
Sure.
Which, and again, if you're going to change that, again, comes from the top. saying this is what we're going to do, and then change the culture in each team. Like so,
Right,
Crazy.
but you bring up a point I think we have hammered a lot in
yeah,
this conversation,
that's,
which is like a byproduct of this, or a way somebody can influence this right away is create definitions.
yeah,
Yeah.
As I think as you grow this, right, and move this conversation to the higher levels, if everybody in a department is doing the same thing, that's awesome,
yeah,
because then you can bring these definitions that are across the board in writing and say, hey,
Hmm.
what are our company
Good point.
or
right.
organization level definitions, right? So I think we have hammered specifically into a lot of that,
There's
but I
never
think
enough
that's the
hammering on that.
evolution. That's the evolution, right, of
yeah,
how organizationally you start to
yeah,
define what these things mean, and then you can put levels on them, right?
hmm
Maybe that's where the curation of like data sets, or where the data come from, or how golden record is it, or what does this mean? And that's where, you have this, I think, launching point in real change in an org, in understanding what's going on, or
yeah.
culture,
Yep.
right, per
Yep.
se, of everybody's on the same page, because they know how this stuff filters up, and they know
hmm
what the organization is saying about those things.
Agreed.
So it's been a chicken and the egg then. As we talk about that, from like, let's say, hey, we're going to start defining things a new way. We're going to start using this product, hierarchy and these categories, or you know, uh, let's say like net new sales will always be calculated this way throughout the company. But if you're building a report still before these things are defined, I don't know. It almost seems either you're going to be repeating processes because you're dealing with the old way of doing it. Like it's almost like and we've kind of had this
Well,
conversation before about where do you start or when can you start rolling things out?
What are you proposing? Waterfall? What do you put?
oh
Waterfall,
boy.
Tommy? What are you,
Oh geez. Here
IT?
we
What are
go.
you,
No,
IT?
all
Yeah.
good.
Tommy's
I
IT.
think
He is.
so. I think promote IT to executive leader. No, no, but I'm saying, but it's not. It's not IT. I keep saying this every time. This is not IT. If I'm saying what's
Evolution.
a customer at a company, that's not IT.
Yeah.
That's a business. That's the company saying how many customers do we have, right?
So
And you can report that to your executive team.
I think it's a progression, right? So I think it's
Yeah.
naive to say
Yeah,
that we can. I think it's naive to say that we can have this massive data dictionary of all the terms started day
yeah,
one. However,
Yeah.
I do think out of like if we think this is important, we need to start with simple actions at the very onset, right? We need to define our calculations well in a single report, and maybe have a separate page or get creative
hmm
around what these calculations are meaning, because I think when we Seth and I've worked on some projects, and that's been one of the challenges, right? I see you have total sales here. What does that mean? Are we filtering anything out? What's going on here? And particularly with people who are brand new in Power BI, they'll use Power BI and they're like, I clicked on this thing, all the data's gone, the whole page is blank. And then we have to explain like what is filter context and like how to
hmm
use the filters. And so like that was probably a failing on our side to not communicate to the users before you, like, and Tommy, I think you have a good method here, right? A simple thing that we can start doing, like actionable thing right now, is when you produce a report, Tommy records a video about the report.
hmm
Here's how you do these things. If you get stuck, here's a button to erase all filters and start over again if you get stuck. And you don't get access to the report until you've watched the video and you've been able to like at least consume some content about what it
yeah.
is. I think in that would just that's just these are simple wins. Just simple ones. And I think those then at some point, Tommy, you start seeing like, okay, we need to have multiple reports. We have multiple things. Now we can start building more of this into like, a library, or
Right.
building a tool that manages all these definitions for our entire company.
But this Tommy is like, I think we've had the conversation in my mind. Like what you're talking about is like kind of the master data, or like the fully
Yeah.
defined thing that makes its way up. That doesn't mean that the organization, like, put this in Power BI report. Power BI reports are going on in your organization all the time. People are getting use out
Sure,
of
sure.
them. They're making decisions on them, etc. It's that graduation, I think, method of certifying data sets and making that standard to the point where, if there's a report that you keep talking about, like the solid definition, if you've gone through and had all of these conversations to define hardcore what every single one of these metrics means, you're certified, you're in this realm,
Yeah.
right? But that doesn't mean all the other reports that are providing use in the organization aren't valuable.
No. No, and I completely agree with that. But Melissa actually said something I'm probably gonna start using too is a working definition.
I like that.
I think
She
what
said,
I'm arguing
well,
though
she's, and
is
let's clarify that
yeah.
statement. She
Is
said,
what Tommy?
so
What?
she,
No, finish. No,
I
stop.
got it
Finish.
hold on,
wrong.
hold on.
Hold
Tommy,
on, Mike, please.
keep glazing over it. Melissa said, I like the definition of a working term better than a
I'm
standard
yelling too much.
definition because the definitions, and her comment before that makes sense here. It says the working definition is, it could change over time. We could say total customers
Yeah.
might have a different definition as we think more about what a total customer really is. Oh, it is all these customers, but we're going to exclude all of our, special snowflakes out of that customer base. That's not what we're calling user base, right? So I, I think there's more context to that. Like I like that a lot. The term working
Working
definition, I think is a good term to use because it might change a little bit.
So my argument is, I think with some of this, once you get the train rolling, or once you get the wheels rolling with some of these things where you don't have things defined,
Yes.
it's going to be really hard to kind of rein it back in. So take
Mhm.
the example again of you have customer sales or net new sales, right? And there it's ambiguous depending on the team or department. And you start, hey, can you build a report? Sure. You build it with their logic. Someone else asks for net new sales, but it's their logic. And now you're building data sets off of that. Then you get these tangled webs of how people are reporting. Corporate goes, what's our customer sales? Both teams, different numbers.
Yeah.
Or just people are just acting in a certain way where you're building these webs where the longer you wait to get some of this right, and you could call them like universal KPIs. There's other team specific KPIs that again are not as, I don't want to say essential, but the things that are eventually going to roll up to from a corporate point of view, if you let these webs and the wheels keep rolling on both sides to try to say, okay, now we're going to rein that back in. You're just
That's not
yeah.
your job. That's not your job to figure out, right? Like, and this is where I'm saying, like, if if you're far down that spiral, guess what you have to do? You have to go take a step back and figure out what the definitions of those things are, and then have conversations around them. When somebody
Mhm.
says, "I'm looking at this sales number and it doesn't match this sales number," then you can say, "Well, the data is telling you the definition for this is this, and the definition for this is this. If neither of those are right, then we as an organization need to figure out what the right metric is." But like you're basing that
Yeah.
decision on the definitions of what should be there or should not be there,
Well,
as
I'm just saying
opposed to having to
yeah.
go figure it out all the time.
So people who are listening on the audio won't be able to see my face, but I know exactly what you're saying because I've said the same thing to people. But most people, if they just say it like, why is it defined that way in this report, you'll just you get a very odd looking face like, well, then it's just wrong. Right. And so they're not going to say, yeah, we need to change the company to that person who's looking at that.
Yeah, but I would also
Maybe they
argue. I
will.
would argue that
Maybe they will.
I'd argue this in that specific scenario. I would argue that there's two definitions for two different things. So everyone's going to have a lens on which they look at the data from whatever they're trying to compute or calculate. And what you've identified is this is gross sales or user sales or sales before tax or after tax, like however that is, right? There are also some things that you need to identify as owned by certain people, right? So the finance team should own most of the stuff around sales because that is their area. That's how they report on sales. And sometimes you need to kind of come in here and we need to kind of have some of these agreements, talk about what's going on. But at some level, at the end of the day, you can't have a term that's owned by everyone all the time. Like there may be some that are very easily we can agree upon, but there has to be someone who is tying ownership to certain areas. And that was one of the challenges that I think I faced when rolling out Power BI in a couple companies was we had a lot of information and information coming into this platform, but we had a hard time getting owners and people to taking ownership of this stuff. And so I think this was
Welcome to all areas of business.
right. So yeah, we
That's
have
a shocker, Mike.
we have product master data. Who owns product master data? Like who's defining and does every characteristic come from one team or multiple teams? And someone's unwilling so this is why I think executive leadership is very important. And when we start driving larger data culture things here, because someone at a higher level must come in and say, I've heard you guys all talk about this thing. Sales team, you own these properties of master data. Finance, you're owning these properties of this definition. And sometimes you need to shut the stuff down. If someone's defining revenue a different way and trying to report that up to leadership, someone at leadership needs to say, tell me what your definition is, and I'll confirm or deny what that needs to be, and that is what we define it as, and we move forward. And then
Yeah,
everyone else
Exactly.
has to fall in line
Exactly.
at some
And that
level.
Yeah.
that definition, that conversation happens when you start to push
Push it
up
up.
definitions from different parts of the organization.
Agreed.
And the organization needs to make decisions
Yes.
around those
Yes.
in order to accelerate or grow their data
Right.
culture. Absolutely.
And
100%.
no, and so two things on that, and then I'm done, and then I'm going to the Field of Dreams game. So, but so I think what you just said is like, again, in order for the organization to say we need to do this, again, it goes. Melissa said this too. It's like data culture either starts from reactive or proactive.
Yeah.
But it's kind of lighting the fire and understanding the value to do this. Because you say we have Power BI, the reports are fine. You always had Excel. So why do I need to take all this time to get every team and department to argue about definitions until they understand the value? The other thing too is I'll relent a little too with the definitions as long as there's good data discoverability, right? So I take an example of, let's say you're at the mall, you're shopping and you got your clothes, you go to the register and it's in euros. And like, what? They're like, oh, this is the Euro cash register. If you want the US, if you want the dollar one, it's over there. Like the hell, like, that you're gonna get frustrated, even though they're both available. It's both this. You're gonna pay the same amount, but is almost the same idea. We're gonna go. I'm not gonna go like it. That's frustrating, regardless if there's two definitions, unless there was a sign that says USA, Euro.
Yeah. No, I get it.
So
So we are officially at time.
Man.
We do have to do like real work and not just talk about data culture all day long. So what we will do is we'll take we'll take what we've talked about here, and we're gonna apply this in all of our areas of our business, and we're gonna drive for more data culture and better definitions. We'll see what happens. With that, Tommy, where can you find the podcast?
So my little thing. So I'll give everyone a little theme
Not
today.
ready to relent.
So I'm like,
Tommy doesn't want to
I can't-
end.
This is too good. So
I can't do it.
going back to the Italian culture, you would always go to the neighborhood, the old neighborhood. So everyone go back to the neighborhood, return to the neighborhood. That's what we would say. That did not come out nearly as well as I thought it would. All right, I'm leaving I'm getting out of here.
Tommy,
Goodness.
where can we find the podcast?
That's getting edited out. I thought it was so good. I thought it was so creative.
It sounds so much better in your head.
Right? You can find the podcast anywhere podcasts are available. Please like and subscribe, leave a rating review. Join us live Tuesdays and Thursdays anywhere now, apparently. So if you just open your browser, you probably see us.
We're on YouTube, we're on LinkedIn, we're on Twitch, we're on Facebook. We're trying to put the
We're
podcast
on your
everywhere.
Email. Yeah.
Yeah. We're at your front door, knocking at your front door. Please listen.
Exactly. If you like the pod, if you enjoyed today and you enjoy just this type of forum, we ask more than anything, share the word, tell a friend about it. Just let people know this exists.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys very much. It's been a super lively, fun conversation. For those of you who have not been able to follow along in the article, go search Power BI Roadmap Data Culture. Really good article. Highly worth a read. Read through it. A lot of thought has been put into it. It resonates a lot of what we've seen, all of us, and so it's really a good topic. Highly recommend you go use that and take some key points out of that and go back to your organization and start talking about it more and having the conversation. I think there's a lot of good steps for people to get involved with. With that, thank you guys very much. We'll see you next week.